There are moments when the Whittaker story stops being about the Whittakers. This was one of those moments. What began years ago as a documentary look at one of the most isolated families in rural West Virginia has now fractured into something else entirely. The focus has shifted. The camera is no longer only on Betty, Larry, Ray, Lorraine, or Timmy. It's on the people around them. And the accusations are loud. Scams, criminal records, housing fraud, illegal drug use, fake illness, donation manipulation. The words are heavy, and once they attach to a name online, they don't come off easily. The Whittakers were already vulnerable. A family shaped by poverty, genetic isolation, disability, and decades of neglect. When the world first saw them, the reaction was shock, sympathy, sometimes ridicule. Then came donations. Then came creators. Then came conflict. Now, instead of asking how to protect the family, parts of the internet are asking who exploited them. This is not a defense of any individual. It is not an attack on any individual. It is not speculation disguised as certainty. It is a structured look at what is being claimed and what can actually be verified. Because once accusations escalate to criminal implications, discipline matters. The current wave of controversy didn't begin with court filings. It began with live streams and emails, comment sections filled with screenshots, private messages circulated claiming inside knowledge. One creator accused another of misusing funds tied to the Whittakers. Another accused someone of hiding a criminal past. There were claims that someone receiving low-income housing assistance was secretly making substantial online income. There were allegations that illegal drug use was being broadcast publicly in a state where such use is restricted. There were accusations of fabricating or exaggerating illness to solicit sympathy donations. These are not small claims. They imply fraud. They imply deception. They imply criminal exposure. But online implication is not the same as documented violation. That distinction is where this story must begin. The Whittaker family became widely known through viral documentary footage. Their home conditions, their disabilities, their isolation, it was raw and difficult to watch. Viewers responded emotionally. Money was raised. Promises were made. Help was offered. But when money and vulnerability intersect publicly, scrutiny follows. Some viewers began asking, where did the donations go? Who controlled the funds? Who benefited from the exposure? Those questions are legitimate. But somewhere along the way, the tone shifted. The conversation moved from financial transparency to personal attack, from accountability to retaliation, from documentation to doxing threats. That's when the story changed. One of the loudest allegations currently circulating involves housing fraud. The claim is that an online personality connected to the Whittaker discourse may be living in low-income housing while allegedly earning significant revenue from online activity. On its face, that's explosive. But housing eligibility is not determined by YouTube views alone. It is determined by reported income, documentation, and oversight by housing authorities. Without verified record from those authorities, the accusation remains just that, an accusation. Another claim involved illegal drug use shown publicly. If true, and if occurring in a jurisdiction where it is prohibited, that would be a matter for law enforcement, not live stream debates. Until enforcement or documented charges exist, viewers are left with interpretation, not proof. Then there are allegations of concealed criminal records. Screenshots have reportedly been shared privately. But a criminal record is not established through anonymous email attachments. It is established through accessible court documentation, searchable databases, and official filings. If such records exist, they are verifiable. If they do not, the accusation carries legal risk. And finally, perhaps the most inflammatory claim, fake illness used to collect donations. This is where digital outrage peaks, because illness appeals to empathy. If someone believes they gave money under false medical pretenses, anger is inevitable. But medical fraud is not determined by suspicion. It requires contradiction by medical documentation or legal finding. Without that, the narrative remains unstable. The Whittakers are now at the center of something they did not initiate. Their story has become a battleground between online personalities accusing each other of exploiting the very family they claim to defend. And this is the uncomfortable reality. When creators fight publicly over who exploited a vulnerable family, the family becomes background noise. The focus shifts from protection to positioning, from helping to winning, from transparency to retaliation. Retaliation rhetoric has escalated in recent weeks. Mentions of exposing private information, threats to release criminal histories, talk of reporting individuals to housing authorities, warnings of copyright strikes, promises of police involvement. Once those statements enter public discourse, the stakes change. Doxing carries consequences. False reporting carries consequences. Defamation carries consequences. Retaliatory exposure can escalate into real-world harm. None of that safeguards the Whittakers. The structure of this conflict follows a pattern familiar in digital spaces. A vulnerable subject becomes viral. Donations flow. Multiple intermediaries emerge. Transparency questions surface. Allegations escalate. Audiences polarize. Reputation warfare begins. The Whittaker story has reached stage 7. But documentary analysis requires something different. It requires separating what has been claimed, what is documented, what is legally verified, what remains unproven. Right now, much of what is circulating lives in the first category. Claims, not court rulings, not housing authority findings, not criminal charges tied publicly to these specific new allegations. Claims. That does not mean nothing happened. It means the burden of proof matters. If housing fraud exists, it will be documented through official action. If illegal drug activity has occurred unlawfully, enforcement will follow. If donations were obtained through deception, financial records will surface. If criminal histories are relevant, they are searchable through public databases. Until then, certainty is reckless. What makes this moment particularly volatile is that viewers feel personally invested. Many donated. Many defended one side or the other. Some now feel embarrassed. Some feel betrayed. Some feel vindicated. And that emotional energy fuels the conflict. But here is the central question that should anchor everything. What protects the Whittakers now? Is it escalating accusations? Is it exposing personal data? Is it reporting rivals out of retaliation? Or is it disciplined verification? The Whittakers did not ask to become the center of a digital civil war over scams, criminal histories, housing eligibility, and alleged drug use. But they are there now. And unless this conversation returns to documented facts instead of explosive claims, the family will continue to be used as leverage in a battle that has very little to do with their actual safety. This is where we start, with structure, with documentation, with restraint. Because when accusations multiply faster than evidence, the damage spreads further than the truth can catch up. The first thing to understand is this. When donations are raised in someone else's name, 3 roles immediately exist. The donor, the organizer, the beneficiary. The Whittakers were almost always in position 3. That matters, because beneficiaries in vulnerable situations often do not manage the funds directly. They don't control the GoFundMe dashboards. They don't track tax obligations. They don't reconcile transfer logs. They receive money as it arrives. That's not unusual. It's common in third-party fundraising. But here's where tension begins. When donors imagine long-term transformation, like buying a house, but beneficiaries are living crisis to crisis, the money disappears faster than expectations can tolerate. And that's exactly what happened in the Whittaker situation over multiple phases. Over time, funds were raised with different intentions. Some campaigns were labeled for immediate relief: food, transportation, utilities, emergency needs. Others were labeled for larger structural goals: housing upgrades, relocation, stability. The problem was never the label. The problem was sustainability. Emergency spending drains funds rapidly. Cars break down. Medical needs arise. Heating fails. Food runs out. And when a family lacks consistent financial literacy, banking safeguards, or professional oversight, large sums do not accumulate. They dissolve into survival. That reality is not glamorous. It is not cinematic. It is not satisfying, but it is common in poverty cycles. Now layer in internet exposure. When millions of viewers watch a vulnerable family, money doesn't just come from generosity. It comes with expectation. Expectation of visible change. Expectation of transformation. Expectation of accountability. And when visible change doesn't materialize fast enough, suspicion replaces sympathy. That's when accusations start. Where did the money go? Why are they still living like this? Who's taking advantage? The Whittaker situation followed that exact arc. But here's what complicates everything further. Multiple online personalities began covering the family. Some filmed, some reacted, some live-streamed, some monetized commentary, some claimed insider knowledge, some claimed to be helping directly, some claimed others were exploiting. And when multiple creators orbit one vulnerable subject, lines blur. Who has authority? Who has access? Who is actually providing aid? Who is profiting from views? Because make no mistake, this story generated revenue. Not only donations, ad revenue, channel growth, subscriber spikes, monetized outrage. The Whittakers became content. And once content generates income, suspicion becomes inevitable. Now, let's address one of the strongest current claims: housing fraud. The accusation circulating suggests that an individual associated with the Whittaker discourse may be living in government-assisted housing while allegedly generating significant income online. If true, that could raise compliance issues. But here's the structural reality. Low-income housing eligibility is not based on YouTube presence. It is based on reported income through formal channels, tax returns, pay stubs, documented earnings. YouTube revenue fluctuates. Donation revenue fluctuates. Self-reported online income may differ from perceived income. Without documented proof of unreported earnings submitted to a housing authority, this remains an allegation, not a violation. Publicly accusing someone of housing fraud without official confirmation carries legal consequences. That line matters. Next, illegal drug use. The claim being circulated is that online content may show drug consumption in a state where certain substances remain illegal. But again, two things must exist for this to become criminally relevant. The substance must be illegal in that jurisdiction. Law enforcement must pursue it. Online viewers do not enforce drug statutes. Screenshots and live stream clips do not equal conviction. If illegal activity is documented and investigated, it becomes a matter of record. Until then, it remains allegation layered onto outrage. Now the most volatile category, criminal records. Screenshots of alleged past convictions have reportedly been shared privately through emails. But a criminal record is not proven by someone saying they have one. It is proven by searchable court databases, public record documentation, case numbers, filed dispositions. If someone truly has a relevant criminal history, it is verifiable without threat. And if someone threatens to expose a criminal record as retaliation, that shifts from transparency into coercion. Transparency is structured. Retaliation is emotional. The distinction is critical. And then there is the accusation of fake illness. This is where public emotion spikes hardest, because illness implies vulnerability, and fundraising around illness implies trust. If someone claimed to have a serious medical condition to solicit funds, and that condition did not exist, that could constitute fraud. But proving medical fraud requires more than disbelief. It requires contradiction by medical documentation, insurance records, physician confirmation, or legal findings. Speculation about health is among the most dangerous forms of public accusation. Once you claim someone fabricated cancer or any serious illness, you have crossed into potentially defamatory territory. Without evidence, that accusation can cause irreversible harm. So what are we actually looking at? We're looking at a vulnerable family whose story became viral. We're looking at multiple intermediaries claiming to protect them. We're looking at donors who feel confused, angry, or misled. We're looking at creators accusing each other of exploitation, fraud, criminal concealment, substance abuse, housing manipulation. And we're looking at escalating threats to expose personal information in retaliation. What we're not looking at, yet, are court findings confirming these specific new allegations. That absence matters. There's another structural layer people rarely discuss. When a vulnerable family becomes dependent on public fundraising, they enter unstable territory. Because public attention is temporary, donations fluctuate, interest wanes, controversy rises, and without professional guardianship, trust accounts, or case management oversight, money moves without durable protection. That's not villainy. That's structural weakness. The Whittaker situation should have triggered something early on. Independent financial oversight, formal case management, third-party audit transparency, clear documentation shared publicly. Instead, what emerged was personality-driven trust. Trust in one creator, distrust of another, allegiance to sides. That's not a system. That's volatility. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Even if no one committed housing fraud, even if no one fabricated illness, even if no criminal record is relevant, even if no illegal drug use occurred unlawfully, the situation was still fragile because it was never built on institutional structure. It was built on internet momentum, and momentum is not durable. Now the conflict has escalated into retaliation territory. Threats of doxing, threats of exposing criminal histories, encouraging viewers to report individuals to housing authorities, promises to copyright strike content, talk of law enforcement involvement. When that language enters the discourse, the risk shifts from financial confusion to real-world harm. Because once viewers are encouraged to file complaints en masse, housing investigations begin, police inquiries begin, digital harassment multiplies, and the Whittakers remain the center of the storm, not because they initiated it, but because their name generates attention. The key question at this stage is not, who is winning? It is, who is safer now? Are Betty and Larry more stable? Is Ray protected? Is Lorraine receiving structured care? Is Timmy under oversight? Is their financial system clearer? Or has the focus shifted entirely to personality conflict? Because once the discourse becomes about destroying rivals, the family becomes secondary. And that is how exploitation continues, just in a different form. There are serious allegations circulating, but allegations require documentation. And until documentation exists through official channels, the responsible stance is restraint. Because once reputations are damaged publicly, reversal is rare. And once retaliation escalates, Consequences ripple far beyond YouTube. The Whittakers deserve protection long before the cameras arrived. The question now is whether this fight protects them or simply creates a new cycle of harm. There's a moment in every online scandal when the argument stops being about facts and starts being about force. That's where this situation is now. The tone has shifted, not from confusion to clarity, but from accusation to retaliation. When people feel attacked publicly, they respond in one of two ways. They either withdraw or they escalate. In this case, escalation became the strategy. Threats to expose criminal records, calls to report housing authorities, encouragement to file complaints with police, accusations of fake illness, accusations of drug use, promises to release private information. What began as "where did the money go?" has evolved into "how do we hurt back?" And once that threshold is crossed, the damage spreads far beyond the original issue. There is a psychological shift that happens in digital conflict. When someone believes they've been harassed or misrepresented for months, they begin to justify extreme responses. "I've been patient. I tried to ignore it. They pushed me too far." That language is common, but retaliation rarely restores balance. It multiplies instability, because now every allegation becomes weaponized. Every screenshot becomes ammunition. Every past mistake becomes leverage, and the public becomes judge, jury, and amplification system. The introduction of criminal records into this conflict is a turning point, not because criminal history is irrelevant, but because of how it is being used. If someone has a public criminal record, it exists in databases. It can be verified legally. It can be discussed responsibly. But when it is presented as a threat, "I'll release it. I'll expose it. I'll tell everyone how to find it," it stops being transparency and becomes intimidation. And intimidation escalates quickly, because the person being threatened now has incentive to retaliate in equal or greater measure. That is how spirals begin. The housing fraud angle adds another layer. Encouraging viewers to contact housing authorities en masse is not accountability. It is coordinated pressure. If legitimate fraud exists, authorities will uncover it through formal process. But mass reporting campaigns often create collateral damage. Investigations that destabilize housing. Stress placed on tenants. Administrative consequences before facts are confirmed. And if allegations turn out to be exaggerated or false, the harm remains. Low-income housing is not a rhetorical weapon. It is a lifeline. Turning it into leverage crosses an ethical boundary. Then there are the drug allegations. Publicly accusing someone of illegal drug use while encouraging viewers to report them to law enforcement is a serious escalation. If there is genuine evidence of criminal activity, that evidence belongs in official channels, not live stream confrontations, not retaliatory commentary. Because once public accusations become law enforcement bait, you are no longer debating content. You are potentially endangering someone's livelihood or freedom without due process. And that is a heavy line to cross. The fake illness claim may be the most explosive of all. Accusing someone of fabricating a medical diagnosis for financial gain is not a small allegation. It implies fraud, manipulation, moral bankruptcy. But proving medical fraud requires medical documentation, not suspicion, not disbelief, not audience consensus. If such an accusation is incorrect, the reputational damage is severe. If it is correct, it belongs in a legal filing, not a feud. Weaponizing illness in online conflict almost guarantees escalation, because health claims are deeply personal and emotionally charged. And once that door is opened, nothing remains off limits. What's happening now is not investigation. It is faction formation. Sides are forming. Audiences are splitting. Comment sections are mobilizing. And when communities mobilize, they don't just discuss. They act. They send emails. They file reports. They dig through records. They contact families. They screenshot everything. This is how digital conflict bleeds into real life. And in the middle of it all are the Whittakers. Again, not because they initiated this phase, but because their name generates traffic. Their story generates views. Their vulnerability generates engagement. The focus has shifted away from their safety and toward creator conflict. That is the danger of escalation. It reframes the narrative. The family becomes background to the feud. There is another dynamic unfolding beneath the surface: exhaustion. Months of accusations. Months of responding. Months of defending. Months of being tagged, named, challenged. When someone feels cornered long enough, their threshold for restraint drops. That's when retaliation feels justified. But justified retaliation is still retaliation. And retaliation rarely improves credibility. It intensifies scrutiny. Because once you threaten exposure, people begin documenting you in return. Once you encourage reporting campaigns, others look for vulnerabilities in your own structure. The phrase, "the enemy of my enemy is my friend," becomes real. Temporary alliances form around shared targets. That is not accountability. It is strategic positioning. There is also the economic layer. Online content monetizes conflict. Outrage drives engagement. Engagement drives revenue. Revenue incentivizes continuation. Even when creators claim they're tired of the drama, the algorithm rewards escalation. A calm video rarely outperforms a combative one. So conflict sustains itself, and the audience becomes both participant and fuel. But here is the structural risk most people ignore. When allegations escalate into threats, legal exposure increases. Defamation law does not care about personal frustration. Encouraging harassment can cross into liability. Publishing private information can cross into doxing. Coordinating reporting campaigns can cross into targeted harassment. Even if someone feels morally justified, courts operate on evidence and conduct, not emotion. This is the stage where caution matters most. Because once lawyers enter, the conversation stops being public and becomes procedural. There's also reputational fatigue. When viewers watch creators threaten each other, expose each other, and escalate repeatedly, trust erodes across the board. It becomes harder to distinguish truth from vendetta. The audience begins to disengage. And when trust collapses, even valid claims lose impact. Because everything looks like a feud. That is the paradox of escalation. The louder the fight becomes, the less credible everyone appears. So where does this leave the situation? In a fragile equilibrium. No confirmed housing fraud ruling. No confirmed criminal conviction tied to current allegations. No confirmed medical fraud finding. No verified law enforcement action based on public accusations. Just escalating rhetoric. And escalating rhetoric increases risk for everyone involved, especially the family whose name anchors the conflict. There is still a path to de-escalation. It requires three things: documentation instead of threats, formal complaints instead of public mobilization, boundaries instead of retaliation. If someone has evidence, file it properly. If someone feels defamed, pursue legal recourse quietly. If someone believes fraud occurred, gather proof before broadcasting. Public warfare may feel satisfying, but it rarely produces resolution. The Whittaker story began with poverty and vulnerability. It evolved into fundraising and hope. It transformed into suspicion and accusation. Now it risks becoming something worse. A cautionary tale about how quickly online advocacy can turn into digital destruction. Part 3 is not about who is right. It is about what happens when conflict overtakes purpose. Because once retaliation becomes the main narrative, the original mission, to protect and stabilize a vulnerable family, gets buried. And when that happens, everyone loses credibility, especially those claiming to defend them. There's a final stage in conflicts like this. It's the quiet recalibration. Not because anyone apologizes, not because anyone fully wins, but because escalation eventually becomes unsustainable. When accusations of scams, criminal histories, housing fraud, illegal drug use, and fake illness circulate long enough, something happens beneath the noise. Fatigue sets in. Viewers begin asking different questions. Not who's guilty, but where's the proof? Not who's louder, but who's stable. By this point, most of the audience has seen everything. The screenshots, the threats, the promises to expose records, the encouragement to report people to authorities, the vows to copyright strike, the challenges, the dares, and something subtle shifts. People start noticing tone. Who is escalating? Who is repeating? Who is documenting? Who is reacting emotionally? Because once a situation becomes saturated with accusation, credibility isn't built through volume. It's built through restraint. The Whittakers remain where they have always been in this story, at the center of a storm they did not create. Their name continues to generate conflict. Their vulnerability continues to attract opportunists. Their circumstances continue to be debated by people who don't live in their home, their town, or their reality. And that is the uncomfortable truth. The longer the conflict continues, the less it becomes about helping them. It becomes about control of the narrative. There are only 3 outcomes from here. 1. Formal action. If fraud exists, it will surface through official investigation. If housing violations exist, they will surface through housing authorities. If criminal conduct exists, it will surface through law enforcement. Not live streams, not comment sections, not retaliatory videos. 2. Dissipation. The audience grows tired. Engagement drops. Accusations lose traction. Conflict burns out. 3. Consolidation. Creators step back. Documentation replaces threats. Transparency replaces escalation. Boundaries replace retaliation. Only one of those outcomes restores stability. Here is what remains measurable. No confirmed criminal conviction tied to the current allegations. No confirmed housing fraud ruling publicly released. No documented legal finding of medical fraud. No court determination declaring fundraising misappropriation in this phase. There are claims. There are counterclaims. There are screenshots. There is anger. But official confirmation is the line that separates scandal from suspicion. And that line has not been crossed publicly. The internet rewards immediacy. Institutions move slowly. That gap creates space for narrative warfare. But eventually, facts either materialize or they don't. And when they don't, escalation begins to look less like justice and more like projection. The Whittaker name has now been attached to fundraising controversy, creator feuds, allegations of exploitation, scam accusations, housing claims, drug claims, health claims. Each new layer adds complexity. Each new layer makes resolution harder, and each new layer risks pulling attention further away from what originally mattered: stability for a vulnerable family. The real danger isn't that accusations exist. The real danger is normalization. When exposing criminal records becomes casual. When reporting housing authorities becomes strategy. When alleging fake illness becomes content. When drug accusations become engagement tools. That normalization shifts standards. And once standards drop, anyone can become the next target. There's a final question that determines where this goes next. Will this be resolved through documentation or destruction? If documentation wins, clarity follows. If destruction wins, reputations collapse without resolution. And the Whittakers remain the backdrop to a conflict that was never supposed to be about creators in the first place. The story is no longer just about who used the Whittakers for money. It is about how quickly advocacy can mutate into accusation, how fast transparency can turn into threat, how easily protection can become performance. Part 4 is not dramatic. It's diagnostic. The system is overheating. And what happens next depends on whether the people involved value resolution more than retaliation. Because once escalation becomes identity, stepping back feels like defeat. But sometimes restraint is the only move that preserves credibility. And credibility is the only currency that survives after the outrage fades. There's a point in every public controversy where the shouting stops revealing truth and starts revealing motive. We're there now. The Whittaker name has carried a weight far heavier than it was ever meant to. Poverty, disability, isolation, cameras, fundraisers, accusations, counter-accusations, claims of scams, references to criminal records, allegations of housing fraud, claims of illegal drug use, assertions of fake illness, and in the middle of it all, a family that did not ask to become a battleground. Here's what matters at the end of this arc. Allegations are not findings. Screenshots are not court orders. Live streams are not legal proceedings. Anger is not evidence. If someone committed fraud, the proof will not come from threats. It will come from documentation and formal action. If someone misused housing benefits, that will surface through housing authorities, not YouTube wars. If criminal records exist, they exist in public databases, not as leverage in creator disputes. If someone fabricated illness for money, that too would require evidence beyond accusation. The standard cannot change depending on who we like, because the moment standards become flexible, everyone becomes vulnerable to the same tactics. And that is the deeper lesson in this entire conflict. Online ecosystems reward escalation. The louder the claim, the faster it spreads. The more shocking the allegation, the higher the engagement. But engagement is not validation, and virality is not verification. The Whittaker situation exposed something uncomfortable about digital culture. Once money enters a story involving vulnerable people, suspicion follows. And once suspicion starts trending, nuance disappears. People want a villain. They want a clean narrative. They want someone to blame. But most real situations are messier than that. Financial instability can look like mismanagement without being criminal. Addiction accusations can circulate without confirmation. Personal records can be referenced without context. And conflict between creators can spiral without any underlying crime at all. That doesn't mean wrongdoing is impossible. It means proof must lead, not emotion, not retaliation, not pride. At the end of this, only one question actually matters. Are the Whittakers safer and more stable than before? Because if the answer is yes, then the noise becomes secondary. If the answer is no, then all the infighting was distraction. This story was never supposed to be about creators competing for moral high ground. It was about a family living on the edge of survival. If there were scams, let evidence speak. If there were crimes, let authorities act. If there were lies, let documentation expose them. But until that line is crossed officially, escalation remains speculation. And speculation, no matter how dramatic, cannot replace due process. The truth does not need threats. It needs patience. The outrage cycle will move on. It always does. But credibility, once lost, rarely returns. So the final chapter isn't explosive. It's disciplined. The Whittakers deserve clarity. And clarity only comes one way: through proof. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.